Hey everyone, and welcome back to the WellBe podcast. This podcast is designed to help you learn, expand what you thought was possible, and become as empowered as you can be in your health. Thanks for tuning back in for the 7th season of the WellBe podcast. I'm your host, Nolan-Smith, and this episode is one of the best things I do straight up. It's called the WellBe Wrap-Up, and if you've been in the WellBe community for a while now, you're probably familiar with it. Every few months, we go through all of the important news that's come out related to health and wellness and pick out 5 to 10 of the most important stories we think you need to know to protect yourself and your family's health and make easy changes shown to improve your health that anybody can make. Sometimes the things we share are shocking. Sometimes they're just cool little nuggets of information, but all of the stories are always chosen to help you become more empowered in your health. Oh, and before we jump in, unless you're driving, of course, then don't do this. But otherwise, if you're holding your phone and you haven't yet left the WellBe podcast a review, please do it right now. It takes less than a minute, and if you're getting anything out of the WellBe podcast, this is your way to tell me and say thank you. So thank you for writing that review. It means a lot. Thank you for listening to the WellBe podcast. And now let's dive in with the April through June 2022 WellBe wrap-up. Story number 1. This is COVID news, which I think we're all getting a little sick of, but it's still very important, and we've got a roundup of a few things that have to do with COVID vaccines. So the first thing is the AstraZeneca vaccine has been linked to a rise in cases of Guillain-Barré syndrome, and the FDA has severely limited use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine due to a different health risk. Meanwhile, a new study shows that being vaccinated does reduce the risk of long-haul COVID, but only very modestly. All right, so the first story about AstraZeneca. Using data from the National Health Service, scientists at the University College London have identified a small but significant association between the first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine and Guillain-Barré syndrome, known as GBS, which is a serious neurological condition that attacks the peripheral nervous system, causing numbness, weakness, and pain in the limbs. The researchers didn't find a similar association for the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines, and they're unclear on what the link might be. Then, related to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, after an updated analysis of cases of thrombosis, which is blood clots with low blood platelet count, the FDA announced in May that Johnson & Johnson's COVID vaccine should be limited only to adults who have no way of accessing other vaccines. Or, just if you're reading between the lines, it should be limited to absolutely everybody. Their analysis found that the condition, referred to as TTS, typically occurs 1 to 2 weeks after vaccination, and women between the ages of 30 and 49 are at highest risk. The FDA's decisive statement is driven by the fact that the risk factors for TTS are unknown. People with TTS can deteriorate rapidly, even if treated promptly, and the condition can have quote-unquote long-term and debilitating health consequences. Yikes. So we are steering clear of that. Lastly, a new Veterans Affairs study showed that while the vaccines do reduce the risk of long-haul COVID symptoms, the risk reduction isn't very significant. In their research, they found that vaccinated people with breakthrough COVID infections had a 15% reduction in persistent or long-term symptoms as compared to those who weren't vaccinated. The study did not show, however, if people had had COVID before and therefore had natural immunity or not. They just said vaccinated and not vaccinated. Vaccination provided better protection for some symptoms than others. For instance, vaccinated people were 50% less likely to develop pulmonary or blood clotting disorders and 28% less likely to experience long-lasting fatigue, but they only had a 12% reduced risk of neurological disease, for example. Most of the people in the study had received the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. However, it's important to note that the people in the study had not received booster shots, which may have altered the risk of long-term COVID. We can't know. Both Guillain-Barré syndrome and TTS, or blood clots with low platelet count, are very serious conditions and can be irreversible. given the elevated risk of these conditions associated with the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccines, as well as various other pieces of negative press these two vaccines have gotten, it seems smart to avoid both of these shots. The risks appear to very much outweigh the benefits. The research on long-term COVID after a breakthrough infection is also an important reminder that vaccinations, even ones without these particular risks like Moderna and Pfizer, are not a perfect shield against the virus. As immunity-avoidant variants like Omicron continue to emerge, this is even more true. So as always, your first and most reliable form of defense is to keep your immune system strong. Story number 2. A federally filed OSHA complaint shows that Abbott knew about issues at its Sturgis, Michigan formula plant for months before it was previously known. And newly released documents show that the FDA investigated more infant deaths than they initially reported. We've all heard about the baby formula shortage. It came about because Abbott Laboratories, one of the biggest manufacturers of baby formula in the U.S., shut down its plant in February of this year after potentially contaminated products led to several infant deaths. But according to an employee complaint filed with OSHA, Abbott actually knew about issues at the plant long before we previously thought and simply failed to act. The complaint, which alleged a long list of issues from failing equipment to lax inspections of products, was filed in February of 2021, a full year before the plant shut down, and nothing was done at this time. The same person who filed that complaint filed another one in October of 2021, which Abbott officials and the FDA acknowledged during their recent congressional hearings. At those congressional hearings, they failed to mention the earlier complaint. The story gets even worse. According to newly released documents made public through a Freedom of Information Act request, the FDA reportedly investigated 7 more child deaths due to the consumption of contaminated formula than was previously reported. The documents show that the FDA investigated reports that 9 children had died since 2021, but they only publicly reported 2 deaths. Both the FDA and Abbott have made statements asserting that they were unable to link those other deaths to contaminated formula, and they stand by their initial findings that the contamination led to 2 deaths and 2 cases of illness, which most of us at this point have decided is likely not true. This type of news is always infuriating, but it just shows us what we already knew to be true. These big corporations do not have our best interests at heart. The bottom line always comes first. We know that breastfeeding is not accessible to everyone and that every mother should make the choice that works for her body, baby, and life. But the recent formula shortage and these revelations about Abbott's intentional deception underscores the importance of not relying on big, profit-hungry corporations when it comes to the health and safety of you and your loved ones. We know alternatives are not always possible, but when they are, there are more reasons than ever to choose them. Story number 3. There are 3 different pieces of news related to cancer and cancer testing. So the first is an industry expert is blowing the whistle on the fact that doctors are not required to report when radioactive material leaks into patients' tissue during imaging scans. Then a new study shows that more than half of women receiving radiotherapy for breast cancer experience symptoms of toxicity that go unnoticed by their doctor. The third piece is good news, which is a trial for an immunotherapy drug had a 100% success rate in rectal cancer patients. All right, so the first thing, imaging advances are an integral part of cancer treatment, and one essential part of imaging is injecting radioactive isotopes into the patient to gauge their response to therapy. This technique can significantly improve survival rates. However, sometimes the radioactive material meant to go directly into the bloodstream ends up in the tissue around the injection site, an occurrence known as extravasation. One expert in the field is speaking up about the fact that extravasation is not required to be reported, regardless of the dose of radioactive material, and calling for regulations to be updated. If you're not familiar with the negative health effects of having radioactive material in your body, you may remember the Chernobyl disaster and all of the health outcomes that came after that nuclear fallout. All right, so radiotherapy is another common and integral part of cancer treatment, and a new analysis shows that women undergoing this treatment for breast cancer commonly experience toxic side effects that go unrecognized. In the study, researchers found that more than half, so about 53% of the women undergoing radiotherapy, experienced at least one symptom of toxicity, which includes pain, itchy skin, swelling, and fatigue, that went unrecognized or underrecognized by their doctor. This was particularly true among younger patients and those belonging to racial and ethnic minority groups. In the drug trial out of Memorial Sloan Kettering, 18 rectal cancer patients were given an immunotherapy drug every 3 weeks for 3 months. Their treatment alternatives included chemotherapy or invasive surgery that could have led to bowel or urinary dysfunction. At the end of the trial, the cancer had been completely eliminated in all 18 patients, something that the lead author of the study said has never before happened in the history of cancer. In follow-up appointments from 6 to 25 months after the trial ended, there were no instances of cancer recurrence. Immunotherapy is a novel kind of cancer therapy that utilizes a drug to stimulate a person's own immune system to kill the cancer or to attack the cancerous tumor. While we don't often report on the results of drug trials in WellBe wrap-ups because there are many, 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 and we can only report on stories that really help you in your life, we love that the most effective outcome from a cancer drug trial in history is one that harnesses the power of the immune system. If that's not evidence that your immune system is your best defense against even the most fatal diseases like cancer, I don't know what is. Now, the toxic effects of cancer therapy can seriously impair a person's life and health. And these first two studies show that these effects can be occurring far more than we know. While treatments like radiation and chemotherapy can be truly life-saving, their risks are very real, which is why the drug trial out of Memorial Sloan Kettering is so exciting. It shows that immunotherapy, which harnesses the power of your own immune system to attack disease, may be an incredibly effective and much safer alternative. Story number 4. I have 2 stories for you related to depression. The first is about vagus nerve stimulation therapy. Now, the vagus nerve is the nerve that connects your gut to your brain. And this kind of therapy has been shown to be an effective treatment for therapy-resistant chronic depression. Now, the second story I have for you is one that shows switching to the Mediterranean diet alleviated depression symptoms in men. So the first one, a recent German journal article highlights the effectiveness of VNS, or vagus nerve stimulation, for treatment-resistant chronic depression, and the fact that very few people know about or take advantage of this treatment is crazy to me. This is despite the fact that since 2005, it's been approved for treatment of depression in adults for whom at least 4 antidepressant therapies did not help. I'm going to say that again because it's so crazy. At least 4 antidepressant drugs did not help, and this therapy helped. This is huge. There are several studies on the effectiveness of VNS for depression, the largest of which showed that both the response to therapy and remission rates were very high in the group that received VNS as compared to a control group that received only talk therapy. Meanwhile, a randomized control trial of young men showed that switching to a Mediterranean diet significantly improved symptoms of depression in young men. The study followed 72 men aged 18 to 25 who suffered from depression and had half of them switch to a Mediterranean diet focused on eating colorful vegetables, legumes, so things like beans, whole grains, oily fish such as salmon, olive oil, and nuts, and avoiding sugar, red meat, and processed foods like crackers and, frozen burritos, etc. Participants on the Mediterranean diet saw a significant reduction in depression symptoms as well as improved quality of life. Both of these studies show just how important your gut health is for your mental health. And this is something we have talked about at WellBe so much. Around 90% of your body's serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter that makes you feel happy and calm, is made by your gut microbes. And these microbes communicate with your brain. How did they communicate, you ask? You guessed it, through the vagus nerve via the gut-brain axis. Given that depression affects over 16 million Americans, and that frankly all of us have times where we might feel a bit depressed, and that many antidepressants have serious side effects. These studies are really important, underscoring that one of the most important things you can do for your mental health is take care of your gut microbiome. If you need help doing that, download the free WellBe Guide to Gut Health. It's such an incredible resource and chock full of so many helpful tips and all evidence supported. I don't know about you, but I never listen to the end of a podcast, so I'm hopping in here to let you know that the best way to stay empowered and on top of your health is to be in the WellBe community. So head to getwellbe.com/subscribe to make sure you're in like Flynn. On getwellbe.com, you'll learn about my private holistic patient advocacy work, my programs to help you go deeper and make life-altering changes to your health, and our awesome non-toxic product database. If you're more of a social media person, let's be friends on Instagram. Find me at getwellbe. Okay, now back to the rest of the wrap-up. Story number 5 is a really easy change to make related to sleep. A new study shows that sleeping with even moderate ambient light exposure can impair glucose and cardiovascular regulation, which contribute to the risk of heart disease, diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. In the study, researchers compared the effects of sleeping with 100 lux, so moderate light, compared with 3 lux, dim light, over a single night. They found that after just one night, people with moderate light exposure increased both heart rate and insulin resistance. Light exposure during the daytime increases heart rate and heightens alertness by activating the sympathetic nervous system. But this research shows that it has the same effect even when you're asleep. This isn't a good thing, since your body needs to kick on its parasympathetic nervous system, aka the rest and digest nervous system, during sleep in order to repair your organs and restore your body and mind. They also found that people who slept with moderate light had increased insulin resistance, which is when your cells don't respond well to insulin and can't use glucose from your blood to make energy. This causes your pancreas to make more insulin and your blood sugar to go up over time. Many people sleep with some amount of light exposure, whether from indoor light emitting sources like TV and electronics, outside sources such as street lights, cars, etc., or a bedside lamp, a night lamp, etc. Insulin resistance and increased heart rate are contributing factors to diabetes and heart disease, which are some of the most prevalent chronic diseases and causes of death in the United States. Sleeping in a dark room is an easy way to decrease your risk. So go off and buy some blackout shades if you don't have one, and an eye mask if you need one just for tonight. But let this study be a reminder that whether you're in your own home or in a hotel room or a friend's house, always have an eye mask with you so that even if the room environment isn't perfect, you can have darkness for your sleep. And of course, in your own home, in your own room, do your best to create an environment that is dark enough. So use blackout shades, maybe also additional curtains if you have a street light outside. Don't use a nightlight, etc. Story number 6 is about hydrotherapy and kids. A new study showed that at-home cold water hydrotherapy helped to reduce lower respiratory tract infections and missed school days in kids aged 3 to 6. How cool is that? The study followed 38 kids divided into 2 groups. One group applied cold water to their arms every day for 6 weeks. The other group had no intervention. The hydrotherapy was done at home by the parents. The results showed that kids in the hydrotherapy group had fewer missed kindergarten days, fewer fever days, and fewer infections of the lower respiratory tract, which includes things like bronchitis and pneumonia. Cold water therapy is considered a hormetic stressor. So a hormetic stressor is one that would be damaging in large amounts, like ice cold water would obviously over time give you hypothermia, which would kill you, but that it can have benefits when experienced in small amounts. All right, so if you have kids or if you don't, this is a great way to give their immune system or your immune system a boost. And even if you're a big wuss like I am about getting into cold water and it takes you forever and you don't enjoy it, you know once you're in and once you get out, it feels incredibly revitalizing and refreshing. So I really do recommend this both for the health benefits and just the way that it makes you feel. Story number 7 is about diabetes, both type 1 and type 2. First, a new study links adolescent, aka tween and teen obesity, with type 1 diabetes, contradicting the commonly held notion that this type of diabetes is caused only by genetics, while another study shows the power of lifestyle to put type 2 diabetes into remission. In a retrospective nationwide cohort study of almost 1.5 million 17-year-olds in Israel, researchers found that obesity was linked with an increased risk for type 1 diabetes. They found that for every 5-unit increase in BMI, which is body mass index, there was a 35% greater incidence of type 1 diabetes. This upends the notion that genetics are the only thing that matter for type 1 diabetes risk, and that lifestyle only plays a role in type 2 diabetes. It also negates the idea that type 1 diabetes always emerges in children. In actuality, about half of all type 1 diabetes cases arise in adulthood. And this study shows that lifestyle choices during younger years can affect the risk of that happening. According to the researchers, genetics are still the main factor in developing type 1 diabetes, but their findings show that if you're at genetically high risk for developing type 1 diabetes, aka it runs in the family, then carrying excess weight will further increase your risk. They believe that this is because carrying too much weight makes the pancreas work even harder to produce insulin, which can cause the whole system to fail. The concept of how your lifestyle turns on or off bad genes is called epigenetics, and we have lots of great content on epigenetics at getwellbe.com, so head to our website to check it out. Another new study shows the power of lifestyle choices for type 2 diabetes. The study followed 200 adults with type 2 diabetes in India, providing them with lifestyle and nutrition guidance via an app. The intervention gathers various pieces of data from each individual, including heart rate, activity, sleep time, blood pressure, food intake, weight, body fat, and glucose values from a continuous glucose monitor. And then real, highly trained and supervised coaches provide precise nutrition and health guidance that is tailored to each person. The coaches in the study were trained dietitians who make manageable mini adjustments to the food a person is already eating to get glucose under control and avoid glucose spikes. The results were striking. A whopping 84% of patients saw a remission of their diabetes after 6 months. Wow. They also lost weight, saw their waist circumference decrease, and had their A1C levels drop from a mean of 9% to 5.7%. The A1C percentage measures how much sugar is attached to your blood's hemoglobin protein, effectively giving a measure of how well your body has controlled the sugar in your blood. The study authors emphasize that remission is not a reversal or a cure, and that just like cancer, type 2 diabetes can return after going into remission. However, they say remission can be made to last by continuing to follow the healing lifestyle. 1 in 10 Americans have type 2 diabetes, and the incidence of type 1 diabetes has been increasing by about 3% annually over recent decades. Both diseases are life-changing and can lead to serious medical complications. They also often require many medications and cumbersome monitoring. These two studies shine a hopeful light, showing not only that your risk of both types of diabetes is well within your control, but also that lifestyle choices continue to have a major effect even after you develop the disease. We're going to continue to ensure we are not carrying any extra weight, we're eating a balanced and nutrient-dense diet, and we're staying active. Story number 8 is about smartphone use, something all of us have to deal with. A study out of Germany shows that reducing your smartphone use might actually be better for you than ditching it completely. That kind of goes against what I thought. The study followed 619 smartphone users and divided them into 3 groups. One group stopped using their smartphones completely for a week. One group reduced their daily use by 1 hour for a week. And the last group used their smartphone as usual. The findings showed that both the smartphone abstinence and smartphone reduction groups saw improvement in life satisfaction, physical activity, and symptoms of depression and anxiety. However, the effects were stronger and more stable over 4 months in the group that reduced their use by 1 hour a day versus the abstinence group. The reduction group also saw a greater decrease in cigarette smoking among those who smoked. Instagram lovers rejoice! Complete smartphone abstinence is not necessary. However, as this study shows, reducing your use can have real and lasting benefits for your health and well-being. This is motivation to get a baseline of your current screen time and then try to cut by an hour a day. Who's up for a smartphone diet challenge? I think this is such a clear-cut, easy thing to implement that I think I'm going to do it tonight. So that wraps up the WellBe wrap-up, although we have one update. In our last wrap-up, we covered the newfound link between the Epstein-Barr virus, known as EBV, and multiple sclerosis, known as MS. Now, new promising research on the topic has emerged. Scientists discovered that by transplanting immune cells that fight EBV, they were able to actually stop the progression of MS in patients who were diagnosed with MS, which is incredibly exciting news. All right, so that's it. I'd love to know what's an action you can take now based on what I shared today. Perhaps it's talking to someone you love who has depression about eating the Mediterranean diet and or getting vagus nerve stimulation therapy. Or maybe it's making sure you're sleeping in complete darkness tonight. Or maybe it's making it a fun family tradition to jump into a cold lake or the ocean with your kids this summer. Or maybe it's trying a smartphone diet like I plan to tonight. Whatever it is, if you need help making the changes or getting more information about a particular treatment, WellBe can help. So head to getwellbe.com to learn how. Also, while you're there, become a WellBe Insider so that you can get all of our latest content, special offers, and personal notes I don't share anywhere else weekly in your inbox. Plus, you'll get a free copy of my audio guide, How to Feel the Best You've Ever Felt and Heal Anything. The 10 things you need to optimize your health and heal any health issue, big or small, naturally. Even if you're the healthiest person out there, I promise you'll learn something you didn't know that can optimize your health. And if you haven't already and found this episode helpful or interesting, subscribe to the WellBe podcast. This way you'll never miss a new episode and they'll be delivered to you whenever we publish a new one. And please share this episode with family or friends who you think might find it valuable and informative. It means a lot and helps more people find the podcast. If you already have, then thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is your host, Adrienne Nolan-Smith, and thanks again for listening to the WellBe podcast.